Cool. Thank you, Rodney, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Johan Fourie. I'm here at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa, the southern tip of Africa, and you'll see Krige Siebrits as well. He's my co-author on this project, and this was a fun project for us. We're not necessarily sports economists or statisticians, certainly not. But both Krige and I have published in sports economics, and I'm also kind of interested in economic history. Krige is an institutional economist, so we come to this topic from our own specific disciplines, also with the help and a lot of help with the new latest large language model tools, Claude Code, which I'll say actually something about as we go along, because I think it's quite interesting also how the process of science have changed over the last couple of months. And of course, this is a topic that we find very interesting, and that I hope that you would also find very interesting. And it's basically a topic that I've been thinking about a lot, because it's actually an empirical question, the question of whether left-hand, right-hand combinations outperform other typically right-hand combinations. So that was really the key question here, and it's born from listening to cricket commentary for my entire life, and often hearing commentators saying, well, here's a left and right hand combination that should unsettle the bowler. And to me, that's always been just a question mark of whether that is in fact statistically true, that we see left and right hand combinations outperform other types of so left or right hand partnership. So that's the question we're gonna ask. It's a question that I asked, as I said, Claude Code to help with, and so I'm going to explain also the process of how we went about this. Now, I've said cricket commentators have mentioned this. Of course, it's not only cricket commentators. Here's the former South African cricket captain, Graham Smith, talking about his partnership with Herschel Gibbs. And, bowling to the two of us in the partnership was sometimes very difficult because bowlers had to adapt to the left-right hand combination. So you'll hear this quite frequently. You'll see it on social media as well. You'll actually hear current coaches, as I'll show you a bit later, also using it in setting batting orders. And so we're going to question whether this is in fact statistically true. So the idea is simply that a left and right hand combination unsettles or disrupts the bowler's line. So it's not, of course, just length. It's line, so they have to kind of switch to either kind of bowling, the off stump of the right hander or the off stump of the left hander, and that means that they don't have this consistency, and so you would expect that there would be more runs flowing as a result of the inconsistency, and therefore left and right hand partnerships would outperform other partnerships. In economics, of course, we care about causality. And so we're going to do a couple of things in this paper. And the one is that we're going to try and find a causal test for this. So it's not just, we don't just want to look at correlations or kind of averages of different partnerships, although we'll do that as well. But we really want to ask kind of a causal question and think hard about how we get there. And as in typical economics fashion, this is not a spy novel. I'm not going to keep the answer until the end. The answer is that we find that there is an absolutely zero difference. There is no evidence that left and right hand batting partnerships, however we measure it, outperform other types of partnerships. If there is, then it's not because of the benefit of the switch. It is because left-handed batsmen typically outperform right-handed batsmen. So it's the quality aspect that outperforms, and not so much the complementarity of the two batsmen. So that's what we're gonna find. So how do we do this? We are gonna use almost 100,000 partnerships, 3.5 million deliveries. We're going to look only at men's cricket. We're only going to look at international cricket. We're looking at 3 different formats that you're very familiar with, I'm sure, and we're going to look at matches between 2001 and 2025. And as I said, this is with the help of Claude Code. It's also with the help of all of this data being available on GitHub, so you can easily download it. It's not that we had to download it, scrape it ourselves. And we're going to perform multiple methods or multiple tests. Much of this is in the appendix. I'm not going to go into the statistics, partly because we're not statisticians, and so I don't really want to kind of spend too much time on the very kind of technical aspects of the paper. I want kind of to talk about the intuition. So we're going to only present two methods, really, the one looking at partnerships and the other one then looking at the deliveries. And there's a specific hypothesis that we're going to test with the deliveries. And we're going to look at pairs within the same innings. And the reason we do that is that means that we can hold batting quality constant or fixed, and we can hold pitch quality fixed, and we can hold match weather, all of these match specific variables. We're going to keep that fixed, and we're going to look within matches, basically. And as I said, the result is that we're going to find mixed hand premium is precisely 0 in all three formats, with one tiny exception, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and that is in T20s. And basically, our contribution is to say that this is the first properly controlled test of a 150-year belief that left and right hand combinations. Now, I must also add that firstly, before I proceed, I'm very happy to take questions during we're economists, so we're very used to being interrupted. So please, if there are any specific questions, then just unmute yourself and ask. So to start then, there's this pervasive, I would say, belief in cricket that left and right hand combinations are better than just right hand combinations. You don't often see this compared to left, partly because there aren't that many left combinations. Typically, there are more right-hand batsmen than left-hand batsmen. But usually people would say left-right is better than right-right, and the reason is that it forces the bowler to kind of switch the line of attack. And so you'll find Ryan ten Dushkat, obviously the Dutch cricketer who's now India assistant coach, talking about the Indian coaches' belief that a big part of our coaches' strategy is to switch the batting lineup so that you always have a left and right hand combination. And there are famous examples where he did this in 2024, for example, demoting Sarfaraz Khan to number 8. And you'll see Sanjay Manjrekar actually I think it was on X or on Twitter, saying, did we really do this for a left and right hand combination? It makes no sense. So it's also to be acknowledged that there are people who have questioned this belief, right? This what we would think of as a myth, that there's this kind of advantage. And so it's important actually from kind of an economics perspective to think about, because this means that batting lineups are not perfectly exogenous, right? So this is really important in terms of testing causality. We have to acknowledge that actually, because of this belief, it might be that there is strategically changes in the batting lineup. And that might affect the methods that we can use. It's partly also why we go to the delivery level and not just looking at partnerships itself. So I've mentioned commentators treat the advantage as axiomatic. Australia's Open is famously, but the little evidence we did find. So there's paper by Brooks, and there's actually some blogs on Krige Info where looking just at averages, these authors show that there's trivially small raw differences. There seems to be a slightly larger average partnership for left and right hand combination than for right, but there's almost no difference between left and left-right. In fact, in some cases, left is larger than left-right. But the issue there is that, again, partnerships are not randomly assigned. So typically, if you think of from the economics perspective, we need to think harder about a test, a clearer test for this, whether we can say, because there might be multiple reasons why left and right hand combinations outperform, specifically referring to the fact that left hand batsmen might be outperforming simply right hand batsmen, and therefore it's a quality advantage. Okay, so the economic question: does input diversity raise team output? So we've got one version of diversity here. Of course, there are in the universe multiple diversities, but here we're going to look at handedness as there's lower diversity if of the two batsmen have the same handedness, and if they have different handedness, that means that there's increase in diversity. So we can look at this kind of clean test of complementarity versus composition. So that's really, really important, this distinction. Complementarity means that there's this added bonus in having a differences, two different kinds of batsmen, versus composition. It might just be that left-handed batsmen are better, and therefore the composition of a left and right hand partnership means that there's better quality and therefore they outperform, right? So it's this difference to distinguish between complementarity and composition that we really want to get at. And we're going to test this in multiple ways. We're going to have like 4 predictions. And so the first is, if we just want to test complementarity, if we can hold quality fixed, so we can keep, we can control for quality in the kind of economics jargon, then complementarity means that there must still be an additional advantage in having a left and right hand combination, right? So that's the first predictable or testable prediction. And then we're going to try and get to the mechanism. And I think this is actually the most useful test for me, or most convincing test probably, I should say. So this is where we say the idea is, the theory is at least, is that once the batsmen change, so they score a run, they run, and the batsmen change, that is obviously where the bowler has to change their line. And so you would expect that for a left and right hand combination, the first ball after they've scored the run, there should be higher runs, more runs scored in that ball for a left and right hand partnership than for a right hand, because now the bowler has to change their line, so they're less accurate, and so therefore the batsman, they have the ability, or the left-handed batsman or the right-handed batsman has the ability to score more runs. So that's going to be the test, and that's where we're going to actually use these 3 million observations to test that mechanism. The third prediction is that if this is true, if the bowler has to adjust their line, well, that's true, of course they have to adjust them, but if they don't like it, if that leads to more runs, then this should be less severe for more experienced bowlers than for less experienced bowlers, right? So if you just become a test player, you don't really have that much experience as a bowler. Now the batsmen switch, it's more difficult for you to adjust. And so you would expect less experienced bowlers to concede more runs, basically, in that first ball after the batsman has switched. And the fourth testable prediction is that format must matter. So you're going to have greater advantage left and right hand combination in formats where the strike rotates more, so in T20 basically compared to tests, right? So that's going to be something that we test as well. So these are kind of testable predictions based on this idea that there's some complementarity between left and right hand combination. I'm not going to go into the economics of it. You'll see that there's kind of several literatures that actually talk about how do you team production and how complements kind of raise returns. There's a large literature on diversity now. There's some about beliefs in sport that persist, and I'll say a little bit about this towards the end if there's time. Okay, how do we do this? We construct, as I mentioned, almost 100,000 partnerships, some 3.5 million deliveries. I say we, with the help of these AI tools. We've downloaded from Krige ball by ball data, which is incredibly valuable. I mean, to do this, of course, manually would have been impossible. We would never have produced this paper had we not had these tools available. And so then we build partnerships from the delivery records. We have runs, balls, batsmen's experience, match situation. We've basically got everything that you can measure we have in there. And so for every batsman, we also compute a pre-match career statistics, right? So before that match occurred, basically a measure of their quality before the match started. And debutants are excluded because we don't have any pre-match quality. And then we pair the partnerships as LL, left, LR, left, and right. So you can see there, quite a lot of tests, ODIs, and T20 partnerships, right? So these are all partnerships. Okay, so I've mentioned we are using Claude Code. All of this is reproducible. We've made it accessible. I'll say something again about this point at the end because it actually does matter. And yeah, it just gives you. I think the important thing here is basically in the title. This would have been months of work without these tools, and for that reason, it wouldn't have been done. We don't have the time to to do this, but I could do this with the help of Claude Code and Krige's inputs in a couple of days. And that is incredible. That's remarkable actually to be able to say that. And you'll see that even it could be done in even less time in future. Okay, so let's get to the results. So we compare pairs. So this is now looking at partnerships, right? But it's partnerships in the same innings. So keeping kind of the match conditions, the pitch, the weather, the opposing attack, match situation, all that kind of as much as constant as possible. So accounting in some sense for that. Do we see that left and right hand partnerships outperform right? And of course, it should be said that certainly in some formats, like in tests, but even in ODIs, the batting order is largely preset. Certainly, I think it's almost always true in test matches, maybe with some rare exceptions. And that's important for the kind of types of tests that we do, right? Because if we think that there's some kind of endogeneity here, that because of left and right handers kind of these match and depending on the match situation, there's selection into who gets to bat next. That might kind of cause issues with our analysis, with our tests, but certainly for test matches, I'm pretty confident that most of the lineups are predetermined or preset. So we ask, among pairs facing identical conditions and of equal quality, do mixed hand pairs score more? So here we just show you the raw data. This is for left, right, and right across tests, ODIs, and T20s. And so, Peter, for your left, you'll see that in tests and ODIs, left always outperform left, right, and right. This is what basically most previous research has shown, right? So this is not the surprising result, but it already confirms to some extent why the idea that a left-right partnership is superior to a similar handed partnership, so left or right, is at least not in the raw data even evident, right? So there might, of course, be other reasons, but in the raw data, we don't see left-right outperforming left or certainly left, except for T20s, right? So you'll see a small advantage in for left-right in T20s compared to left. You would see, however, that because there are quite few left partnerships, that the confidence bands are quite broad, right? So keep that in mind as well. We are not as confident in the average of the left because there aren't that many of them. So that's something to keep in mind. So okay, this is raw data. There's no real analysis in here, but it already points to the fact that one should be skeptical of anyone making a claim that left-right combinations are. Now what we do is we control for quality. So there's I can go to the formal analysis in the appendix, but the idea here is just to present you with the intuition, and that is just to say, given batter quality, so given like the batsman's average before the game started and various other kind of measures that we have for quality, do left-hand, right-hand partnerships outperform right or left? And you'll see there that the answer is a pretty clear no, right? So there's no statistical evidence in the point estimate that there's an advantage. In fact, 2 of the 3 formats have a negative point estimate, which means that it's actually that they underperform the other partnerships. But even the one where it's positive, you'll see the confidence band there crosses the 0 line. So there's no evidence where that there's any positive. And those numbers are really tiny, right? So even if there was it would be a very, very small number. So it's not like it's badly measured here or that there's kind of large variation. Because we have so many observations, we have very precise estimates here, and so I think the first predictable or testable prediction is clearly rejected here. That there's complementarity compared to quality. So how would we interpret that is that it's just that left-handers are better batsmen than right-handers, right? So here across the three formats, through using a Oaxaca blinder decomposition, again, I'm not going to go into the technical detail, but it basically allows you to extract whether quality or so the complementarity or the composition effect is bigger. I shouldn't say quality, I should just say composition effect. So which of these are bigger? And actually in tests, you'll see that it's like above 100%. So the gap is really explained by quality. It's the fact that left-handers are simply better batsmen. So the way to interpret that is that the pre-game average is just superior to right-handed batsmen, and therefore the fact that there are larger left-hand right-hand partnerships are bigger is simply a fact that they include a left-hander. Right, that's the composition effect. It's not the fact that they have some kind of complementarity with the right-hand batsman. Right, so that's, to me, again, this is the first clear evidence that we should not. The complementarity effect is small. Again, the T20s, you'll see that it's somewhat below 100%, right? So maybe if there is anything in there, it would only be in the T20s. And again, we'll get back to this result a bit later. Okay. To me, the most convincing of all the tests is this one. Is this kind of P2 or the testable prediction number 2, which is if the argument is, and this is almost always the argument, that the bowler must change their line, then this effect must be bigger than the first ball after there has been a strike change. Right? So the first ball, so there's you bowl to the right-hander scores a single, the batsman of course changed, and now the bowler has to adjust their line to the left-hander. The first ball after that single must be the ball where the bowler is most likely to be affected by this change. Right? So we should expect to see that specific ball after the change would lead to a greater number of runs or perhaps fewer dismissals, right? Because the accuracy of that ball, at least according to the theory, should be worse because the bowler was forced to change their line. So this is the test. We're going to look at almost 3.5 million balls, and we're going to look at all the strike changes, and then we're going to look at whether the ball after the strike change, when there's a left-hand right-hand partnership, delivers more runs. Right? Score like the batsmen score more runs for left and right-hand partnerships compared to right-hand partnerships or left. And this is the sharpest test that we have in this paper, and I think it's kind of the most convincing one. Okay, so firstly, let's just look at strike change. Right, so now if you look at the kind of the maroonish dots here, this is what happens. This is the effects on runs per delivery. So that's our outcome measure. That's the measure we use. So runs per delivery in the ball after a strike change. And what you'll see is that in all three formats, that after you've seen a strike change, there are fewer runs scored in that delivery. Right. So you see a batsman score a run. So let's say you've got a right-hander, they bat, they get a single, now the left-hander or another right-hander is on strike, and that next ball actually produces fewer runs on average, right? So runs per delivery. That's true for all tests. What we would expect is that result would be different for left and right-handers, right, compared to right-hand. If our theory of handedness is true, if this myth is true, then that left-hand right-hand combination, you should expect to see that they score more runs, and that is what the yellow line says. And again, you'll see that it's perfectly flat, that there is no difference for a left and right hand combination in the ball after a strike change compared to a right hand or a left hand left. And to me, that is by far the most convincing evidence we have in this paper, because those three dots there at the top, they're almost perfectly on zero, right? And it's very precisely, because we have 3.5 million observations, it's very precisely measured. And you'll see even the kind of the y-axis, the size of these coefficients are tiny, right? So there's very small, you score 0.03 fewer runs in the delivery after, right? So that's tiny, but there's clearly no difference for left and right hand combinations compared to left or right. So to me, this slide 15 is the one that if I can summarize the paper, this is it. And we can do this. You might say, well, actually, Johan, it's not that we want to measure runs scored. It's that we want to measure wickets. So maybe it's, the bowler doesn't really care about runs. So accuracy is not what we're caring about in terms of runs scored, but maybe the bowler actually takes more wickets. And what you'll find is that, so runs scored we see a zero effect. We're not just looking at those kind of coefficients there in tests and ODIs and T20s. What you do find actually is that batsmen following strike change of a left and right hand combination faces fewer balls, which means that they actually go out more often in tests. So the bowler is, in some sense, more accurate for left and right hand combination than certainly less accurate, right? We would expect less accuracy, that's the theory at least, in the ball following a strike change, and therefore fewer wickets would fall, right? What we find is a small effect on the balls faced in those partnerships, and so you see more wickets after a strike change in Test cricket. Right, that's a very, very tiny effect, I should say, but it goes in the opposite direction of what we would expect. So there's a what they call kind of a dismissal risk, but it moves against mixed pairs. So if anything, you don't want left and right hand combination in tests simply because there's a slight kind of greater likelihood of a dismissal. But that's contra the theory that we proposed initially. Just to say, this test reveals one exception, and that is in T20s. And this is not something that we really can explain at the moment. And it's certainly something that requires a little bit more attention. So we see there is some effect in T20s for mixed pairs, right? So for left and right hand combinations, and especially for, if you look at, it's not the best partnership, so it's not at the quintile, say the top 10% of biggest partnerships. It's also not at the smallest partnerships. It's somewhere in the middle that there seems to be a little bit of an effect, right? So we'll see this is the confidence band around it, and it's above zero. So it's still tiny. These are less than one run, but it does seem to be different than zero. And so that's something worth investigating. T20 might be somewhat different, but again, it's very on average it's zero. So I should say that it's on average it's not different to zero. So that is the green, and that's the average. I'm not sure if you actually can see my mouse. So the dotted line is the average across all partnerships, and the green is confidence band, so that's not different to zero, but in the middle partnerships, it does seem to be some advantage. So that's maybe worth studying. And you might then ask, so why is this? Why do we find this myth persisting in like $1 billion industry, right? So cricket is obviously a massive industry at the moment, or has become a massive industry. And that's kind of interesting for economists because typically, we believe that the market will sort things out, and that if there are erroneous beliefs, ultimately competition will solve that. But we don't see that happening. And so there's you can think of a couple of disciplines in economics that helps explains why this is. Behavioral economics would say that it's something called confirmation bias. So you see a mixed pair succeed and you think, that's because of a mixed pair, but you don't actually see the mixed pair fail. You don't immediately think, it's because of a mixed pair. And so you've got this confirmation bias. If you're looking for something, you're going to find it. Motivated reasoning, this is where coaches, they have specific views on the world, strategies they want to follow, and reputations. And because they've invested in this reputation, they persist with it. And if there's no very extreme kind of cost to it, and that's probably the fourth one here, is that there's weak selection. It's not that this produces a negative result, right? It's not that left and right hand partnerships are worse than right and right hand partnerships. So it's clearly not adding much value or any value, but it's also not detracting, and so it's costless basically to persist with the strategy. And there's also this idea of like selective observation. So basically, if you just look at the raw numbers and you compare left hand, right hand, and right, the left hand, right hand partnerships do appear as if they outperform the right hand. But as we've shown, it's because of a composition effect and not complementarity, right? But because it looks supportive to you kind of persist with this idea. But the point is really that the composition effect is invisible to the naked eye, and without quality controls, the data really do seem to confirm the myth, the raw data. So this is just about the literature on diversity. Again, I don't think we really need to say too much about it. I think we've said rule out composition before claiming complementarity. Okay, there's a couple of limitations of the study, as always. We know that batting order, at least in the T20 format, is not randomly assigned. We've seen Gautam Gambhir explicitly state, and actually demonstrating it on the field, that he's willing to shift around the batting order to ensure that there's a left and right hand combination. So we've tried to mitigate this as much as possible, specifically with that P2 test, but we can't entirely eliminate the fact that there is some endogeneity in how batting lineups are chosen. We acknowledge that, of course, an average after one match is very different than an average after 100 matches, and we can't really there's other things potentially that we could do. We could look at domestic averages and these kind of things, but we don't, and potentially in future we can do that. We've only looked at men's international cricket. I'll say something about that just now, and maybe you can think about a kind of a more natural experiment, and I'm very happy to hear those of you who are statisticians or economists. Maybe you've got some ideas of what to test. Krige and I played around with a night watchman. So that's obviously kind of randomly sending or exogenously kind of shocking the system with a batsman as a natural experiment. But there's just too few observations that we could test left and right hand combinations of night watchman. The error band is just too big. It doesn't really reveal anything. So there's various ways that you can improve this analysis: domestic cricket, women's cricket, better natural experiments, and various other things. And I'm sure you've got some ideas as well. In fact, I was discussing this with someone this morning, and they also came up with a new idea that potentially we can test. We can add to the test. Maybe just something on the process before I conclude. So we wrote this paper 2 weeks before the IPL started, and then on the Friday, so the IPL started on the Saturday. I posted this on LinkedIn and on Twitter, on X, and I went to bed that night with, I think, like 4 likes. So I thought, well, no one's going to read this. It's just terrible. Spend all this time working on this, and who cares? And then I woke up with hundreds of retweets and likes, almost all of them from India, with lots of comments. And of course, it's almost half. Some people saying this is absolute rubbish, and others saying finally someone is showing us the truth. But what might be interesting for this audience is that on the Sunday, so the Saturday, of course, was the opening of the IPL, and then on the Sunday, I get a message on LinkedIn from Vishal Mitra. I'm not sure if he's on this call or listening, but he's a professor of computer science at Columbia University with his own paper, and he's also used Claude Code, basically testing our predictions. And to give you, and the reason he could do that is, of course, that a lot of this is open data and reproducible these days. And so he finds using more partnerships, he looks at domestic T20 leagues, right? So this is now IPL and all of the other T20 leagues across the world. 160,000 partnerships, and so much larger than ours. He replicates it, he extends it in various ways, and basically he finds exactly the same results. That the myth persists. There's no left and right hand combination. So it's kind of independent data. And I think just to summarize this is that the science, we still haven't heard back from a journal. We've submitted it to a journal. It's now months since we've submitted it. It would be another several months if it is accepted. It probably will go through a couple of rounds of refereeing. It will only appear in a journal a year or two from now. But in this case, I published it online, and within another day or two, I had a follow-up paper kind of testing our predictions. And so that to me is an incredible, actually a kind of a remarkable change in how science has evolved over the last couple of months. And so that's fantastic. And hopefully this will also mean that, other famous myths in cricket can also be easily tested. And I look forward to reading those papers. So I'll leave it there. I think the results are pretty clear that we find no premium of left and right hand partnerships in tests, ODIs, and T20s. If anything, is a slight advantage in T20s, but that really needs further investigation. If there's an advantage, it's because of composition. It's because left-handers have higher quality, and I think there's also lessons beyond cricket, which I don't think is necessarily important here. But I think it's important to, if you think about diversity, whether to kind of difference between whether this is complementarity, so the sum is more than it's more than the sum of its parts. Or whether it's just basically composition, right? That you select in people that are better. Thank you very much.
I will, with your permission, be giving a précis of this talk to two of my commentators on Major League Cricket, Tommy Mbangwa and Liam Plunkett, who were both very interested and surprised when I mentioned what we'd be discussing this morning, and so has everyone else I've mentioned it to. It is, as you say, a myth in cricket. It's taken for granted. It's something that feels it should be true. So I suppose my question to you is, were you surprised that it turned out to be untrue? I mean, presumably not. If you hadn't harbored some doubts on this score, I imagine you wouldn't have inquired into it. And of course, you did mention that there had been some prior research showing that, if anything, it was left-left combinations that held sway.
I think, Rodney, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think I've always had some doubts, and it's just, to me, been fascinating that no one has really, well, I wouldn't say no one, but there hasn't been kind of a clear test of this before, apart from just the left and right hand. And I think, being an economist or trained as an economist, I think the fact that those that did test it only looked at kind of averages just feel like insufficient evidence to say that there is some advantage, if anything, right? So I think I've always had partly because I'm a batsman. I'm a batsman, opening batsman. I don't think I've ever faced a bowler thinking, after batting with a left-hander, thinking, oh, now the bowler is going to be it's going to be wild and now I can just score runs. It's not something that I've ever thought. And I'm sure if there was inaccuracy, less accuracy, whatever, less consistency, then batsmen figured those things out. You would know that the next ball would be might be a wild one. And as a little bit of a bowler, I'm certainly not a bowler, but I've kind of always enjoyed switching. It's always been fun to. So I've found, maybe you should ask Pommy that, because he's been a bowler, right? I think, but it would be interesting to know from bowlers whether they don't actually enjoy switching between right hand and left hand combinations. And if that's true, then clearly there's no obvious advantage to left and right handers, but it just, because it's so intuitive, right? Because it just feels like it must be true, or there's some, it's a sensible argument. I guess it's persisted for so long. Krige, I don't know if you've got any ideas.
No, there were some interesting questions that we could have a look at already on the chat.
Okay, let me go there.
But Johan, you have not confirmed that we are a left-hand, right-hand combination.
Okay.
I hope people like the paper.
That's true. I haven't thought of. So the thing I thought about this morning, Krige, actually, maybe you've got some, is that I was playing paddle this morning with a guy who played cricket with me, and he is a left-hand. He's a brilliant left-handed batsman. And then he was playing paddle with his right hand, and I realized that he's a right-handed. He throws the ball right-handed. So I was wondering whether we shouldn't differentiate, and I'm not sure actually why this should matter, but it might, that we should differentiate left-handed batsmen from whether you bowl left-handed and whether you bowl right-handed. So maybe there's something about your more natural ability as a left-handed batsman, or you've maybe got a stronger offside play or an onside if you're a natural left-hander compared to if you're I don't know what the other one would be, but that's something that we could potentially just test as well.
I wondered if I may briefly interrupt, Rodney.
Sure.
Krige and Johan, thanks very much. I really enjoyed that. It's fascinating stuff. I was just intrigued to know whether you were going to take it on a stage further and have a look at the combinations when they were facing left arm bowlers or right arm bowlers to see whether there was any advantage in that, because that might be a fascinating piece of information. But as a sort of sub point to that, what I did notice was that all the statistics, there was very little variation between the type of partnership, either left, right, or right. So it's fascinating that it all evens out one way or another, regardless of the psychological effect that people seem to think that there is.
Yeah, we do control in the regressions for whether you're a right-handed batsman or a left-handed batsman. Left-handed bowler or right-handed bowler, and whether you're what type of bowler, so spin bowler or fast bowler or this kind of that kind of stuff. So you might also think that it might be easier for a spin bowler to adjust than it is for a pace bowler, for example. But no, there's no difference. Like that it really doesn't matter. Which again is a bit surprising. So maybe I don't know whether if you're a left-handed batsman, a left-handed bowler, you might be, because there are more right-handed batsmen, you're obviously used to bowling to more right-handed batsmen. But that should be true for right-handed bowlers as well. So we don't find anything in the statistics that shows that left-handed bowlers have some kind of different effect on the partnerships.
And if I may just make one small observation as well about your point about the left-hander who throws right-handed. About 35 years ago, I played in a game with John Edrich, the great English left-hander who threw right-handed. And I batted with him for a few overs, and what intrigued me was how little he used his left hand. It was all in the right hand, so having that stronger right hand was the big thing for him. It meant that he didn't play across the line, and he just used his left hand to manipulate the bat ever so slightly. So I know we're going off piece, but that was fascinating to me as well.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can tell this audience that I think one of the best cricketers that I ever played with was Schalk Burger. And of course, Schalk is a rugby player, but I think he should have been a cricket player. He should have chosen cricket as his career. And he's obviously right-handed, but he had an incredibly beautiful cover drive as a left-handed batsman. Well, he still has. So I should say he hasn't stopped. He still can play cricket, I'm pretty sure. But that's exactly that. He's got this incredibly strong right arm, and it just, it's beautiful to watch.
We got a really good question earlier from Mike Long, who asked, could this legend be something that is in fact present at lower levels of cricket, but not in international cricket due to the quality of bowlers? I imagine that in the age of clubs throwing all their statistics online, this might be something it's possible to inquire into.
Yeah, that is true. We can certainly test this at different levels of. I mean, I think actually you could do this only. You don't have to do it for all countries, right? You could do it for county cricket and maybe a lower level. That should be available maybe on Cricinfo or Cricksheet where we got it. The professor from Columbia, of course, did use domestic T20 leagues. So at least that's at a lower level. But you're right that it might be, or certainly school cricket, right, where you do have much less experience. That's very plausible. So that's kind of the myth is born there, and then it's kind of carried through to international cricket. So that's very, very likely.
So how will you try and develop this thesis further now? Because it's really interesting stuff, and as Rodney's just pointed out, he's going to be having a discussion about it on broadcasting this afternoon or this evening. It's certainly something that would intrigue members of the ACS. So we'll definitely be encouraging people to listen to it. And we obviously always promote these things on the X account and on Instagram, etc. So I'm sure that you'll get plenty of content and plenty of discussion about it, because it is one of those great myths, isn't it, that somehow or other it's going to disrupt the opposition.
I think, I mean, certainly from my brief experience on Twitter, the day of the IPL, is that it's very hard for people to let go of these beliefs. So, despite any evidence that we put out there, and it's there for everyone to replicate. They can run it themselves. If we've made an error, they can point it out. But that's not what they argue, right? They say, this is you must have done something wrong, or they find some kind of excuse that they can cling on to their beliefs. So I don't imagine that suddenly we'll have teams purely selected on just kind of merit, if that's the right word. I think this will persist, but the paper is available. As I said, we submitted it to a journal. We're waiting for feedback. It's available on our departmental website. I'm happy to share the link with anyone. You can share that as well. And we very like the professor from Columbia. If there's anyone that wants to do follow-up work, wants to test different leagues, women's cricket potentially as well, it would be or you've got I'm very keen on thinking about like alternative, interesting tests that might reveal something. Because I should add, in the presentation, I didn't get to that, but there's a lot of robustness checks that we do, right? So just to maybe say something about them, we've got I've mentioned the Oaxaca blinder decomposition, which we can kind of look at complementarity and composition. We've got Oster bounds. We've got a randomized inference testing. We've got survival analysis. So for those of you who understand statistics, got the probability of survival, comparing these different, we've got Cox proportional hazard models, quintile treatment effects, all of these causal forest analysis, so that's kind of machine learning type stuff. All of these tests show is a null. So I'm pretty confident that there is a null result here, that there really is no advantage. So I'm but again, like if people point out, so some of what these models do, especially in the causal forest, is that you might think of that there's a specific case where it works, right? So it might be for fast-paced bowlers at the opening of a second innings, in certain conditions, whatever. But it doesn't. Like none of these, it just isn't. Any small cluster of things that outperform consistently left and right hand compared to the others. So I'm pretty confident that what we've got here is a fair result. And but it's one thing producing science, and it's another thing convincing audiences, commentators, and coaches that this is, and even players. I think my sense is though that players might be more accepting of this, partly because as players, I don't think, maybe. So Graham Smith and Herschel Gibbs's quote, let's get back to the start again. I mean, this is obviously after the fact. I'm not sure if you ask Graham Smith at peak Graham Smith Gibbs era, is it the left and right hand combination? Maybe he says it's that, but I think he would have probably other ideas at that moment. But after the fact, you can always point to saying, oh, it's because of the left and right hand combination that we were so successful. But of course, he also had Alvaro Peterson as partner, and he had Gary Kirsten. Was he Krige? Did he ever bat with Gary Kirsten? Graham Smith, I'm not sure. Maybe
Gary moved to number 3 really when Graham Smith came along. Yeah. Kirsten actually quietly is South Africa's, at least statistically, greatest ever number 3, whereas we tend to think of him more as an opening batsman, ironically. That the ball is imperative to alter his line when a new batsman takes strike. That this has no appreciable effect, at least none we can find in these statistics, is probably the most surprising finding you've presented to us. I wonder if this has broader implications for what we understand about bowling. The idea of rhythm, construed very broadly as settling into a consistent line and length and angle of attack, and perhaps even the very notion of consistency itself. Is that less important than we take it to be? I guess what I'm asking is if beyond busting the myth of left-hand, right-handed partnerships, your findings reveal anything else about our game.
Yeah, it's a great question, Rodney. the way I interpret that finding of the number of runs per balls you score immediately after a strike change is simply the fact, as a batsman, we've just scored a run. There's no immediate need for me to score another run, right? So I'm going to be less likely to take a chance immediately after we've just had a single or whatever than I would be if I've been facing 3 or 4 balls without scoring, 3 or 4 dots, and now the pressure is on to score. So that at least that's from my. So your question is more about from the bowler's perspective and consistency in line. Mine would be from the batsman's perspective, as simply saying there's less of a need to score more runs immediately after we've just scored a run. From the bowlers, so I haven't thought about it from the bowler's perspective. So actually addressing your question, and Krige, if you've got any ideas, my view is just that I don't think that again, if you're a bowler and you have just conceded a single, that what would be the implication for consistency? I don't know. Krige, do you have any ideas here?
This is slightly different, but as Johan showed, it's a small difference even in T20s, but that's one where the rhythm aspect may come in a little bit as bowlers have much shorter spells, if any, sometimes. So the fact that there's a slight difference with T20s may perhaps say something about the importance of rhythm and how hard it is to adapt. But again, it's not a strong result, so I don't know how much to make of that.
It would be.
Maybe.
I mean, I'm thinking, Rodney, it might be because we talk about runs per ball, right? So, but it might be that, of course, you don't only score a single, you score a 4 or a 6. And so that Krige might actually affect our analysis here, in that we should probably take out those things or account for them in some way. That, is there a difference between, running a single and so now you kind of switch compared to hitting a 4 or even hitting a 2 and you've got the same batsman on the strike? That might be interesting from a consistency perspective. Okay, sorry, Peter, did you have?
I was just interested in maybe Rodney can ask Liam Plunkett this afternoon, but he was one of these bowlers who came round the wicket a lot to left-handers. And when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s and 80s, it wasn't really a usual form of attack by pace bowlers to go round the wicket. And that's changed a lot now. It's pretty much routine, isn't it, that pace bowlers come round the wicket to left-handers as opposed to staying over the wicket. But certainly, at least in part, whereas I think 40 years ago that really wasn't used very much. It was always intriguing to me. And personally, on a left-hander, I always like it when the right-arm bowler comes around the wicket. I find it much easier to face that than I do when necessarily they're coming across me. So we've all got our little weaknesses, haven't we, and strengths. I was just.
Sorry, Peter, you just actually touched on something that we haven't addressed at all in the paper, and that is obviously, once you've got a left and right hander, the field has to change every time, and we don't account for that, right? So we can't look in our data. There's no evidence or there's no information about fielding positions, and so maybe that's something worth. Maybe the fielders wake up because they have to change all the time, and so especially in Test cricket, you might be standing there for hours in the same position, and suddenly you've got a left-hander, and now you kind of you're gully now suddenly, and you have to kind of switch to the other side or whatever. So maybe there's something in how fielders respond, not just the bowlers and the batsmen, but we leave that for future research.
Thanks also to Mike Long for an interesting suggestion on the chat.
Yes, Mike's made some very good comments.
Well, if we have no others, I think we might call it a night, and it still feels like night to me, a morning in your case. And I don't see anything more. So thanks very much, Johan and Krige, for a fascinating talk. This question and answer session has been especially robust and interesting, and I know it's going to give my colleagues something to talk about in the commentary box today. So I thank you for that as well.
And good luck with the ongoing publication of it. I mean,
Thank you.
One minor suggestion that you may or may not want to take up is we in the ACS journal we have often summaries of pieces of work that people have done, and we're very happy to publish that. The ACS has around 800 members, all of whom receive the journal, and their natural leaning is, I think everyone on this call would agree, is towards interesting statistical / academic research. So if you felt that you wanted to write some words or summarize it briefly, you could, and we'd be delighted to publish that.
Of course, no pressure. We could just publish the transcript of this meeting and save you that work.
That's something we'd be very keen on. No, I mean, it's always funny. So I'm not sure that the journal we submitted to has a large cricket audience, so it would be nice to actually have an audience of cricketers.
Okay, I'll put you in touch with our editor, and we'll see what comes of that. That could be very productive. Well, thank you, everyone. I've really enjoyed this. Worth getting up at 6 a.m. for. And please have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Krige and Johan, thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.